Recently in my shop, I showed my good friend Bill how to build a simple shaker-style dining table. In this video, I'll walk you through the process. Before we begin, let me show you the design. Also, if you're interested in these dimensions, I'll have a free PDF that you can download on my website. The table will be 78 inches long, 31 inches high, and 40 inches wide. This image shows a basic trim piece added to the bottom of the rails, but as you will see, we actually did not add it. The legs are 2.5 inches square at the top and have a taper on the interior two faces that starts 5 inches down from the top. The taper goes in by 1 inch, leaving 1.5 inches square at the bottom of the legs. All of the rails are inset 1/4 of an inch from the legs, and an interior rail is added to break up the length and prevent the long rails from bowing in or out over time. I had a stack of 2x6 by 10 foot long pine boards on hand, so we sized our cut list with those in mind. Now, assuming there is no waste, which never happens, it will take 10 of these boards. The first step was to bring it all in and sort it by appearance. Now, we wanted the best boards for the top and the best of the best for the outside two boards of the top panel. Once all pieces were accounted for, we started breaking down the boards at the miter saw station, and then skip planed everything at the planer. Now, every time I have someone helping me build, I always get a big smile on my face, just because how much faster work can be done. Having someone catch and stack material coming out of the planer, or out of any tool for that matter, while I focus on feeding it, speeds things up tremendously. Same at the bandsaw, which is where we went next. The legs will be a lamination of two pieces from the same board. Our goal was to get this table built in 1 day, so we needed to get stuff in clamps as soon as possible so it could sit in clamps as long as possible. First up was the legs, and we glued all 4 legs in one clamp up, back to the tabletop and the rails. Now, instead of using a jointer to joint these boards, I wanted to show Bill that you can still get good glue faces at the table saw. Now, I've built many of these shaker tables before getting a jointer and always had good glue seams, so long as I took my time and made sure to keep my material up against the fence at the table saw. Now again, Bill pulling and stacking material after it went through the saw sped things up tremendously. We also established the width of the rails at this time. Now we can determine the final layout of the top panel boards. No matter what we did, we had to include some of the knots on the top panel, but we made sure to have no knots along the perimeter. We also moved and rotated the pieces to more evenly distribute the knots. If you have all the knots at one location or on one side, it just kind of looks distracting. To help with alignment during the glue up, we first laid out pencil lines for biscuits and then cut the biscuit slots. Now, if you're just getting started in woodworking, I highly recommend picking up a biscuit joiner. They're relatively inexpensive and are one of the best ways to keep seams level during a panel glue up. And finally, the tabletop can be clamped up. With a big panel like this, it's a really good idea to go through a dry run to make sure all of your clamps are adjusted as necessary and that you have the appropriate amount of clamps ready. This extra step should eliminate any panic moments in the middle of a glue up. Here's another recommendation. The white pipes you see here are what I call clamping platforms. I have a video that you can check out where I show how to make a good set relatively inexpensively. Basically, they serve one main purpose. They isolate the movement of the panel from the movement of the clamps, and vice versa. They also allow for room below the panel to add additional clamps, and because they're made from PVC, glue won't stick to them. I highly recommend making some for your shop. Also, when gluing up a panel like this, alternate the clamps on top and bottom to prevent the panel from bowing. Over-tightening the clamps on bottom will make the panel bow up. Clamps on top will make the panel bow down. So even out the clamping pressure and use a straight edge to make sure that there is no induced bow to the panel. We moved the top panel to dry elsewhere while we shifted our attention back to the legs. They are jointed and planed to 2.5 inches square, and then cut to length at the miter saw. First squaring one end, and then the final length is established with the help of a stop block. Now, there are many ways to cut tapers, but Bill has never seen a taper jig in action, in person anyway, so that's the route we went. Both tapers were cut on the legs at the bandsaw with this particular jig. The bandsaw leaves a rough surface that is easily cleaned up at the jointer. If you have a hand plane, use a hand plane. A jointer is just faster. We made sure not to be aggressive with the cut depth and to cut the same number of passes for each face to ensure the taper was the same dimension on all legs. A little more of the same at the miter saw to establish the final length of the rails. For the joinery, we used pocket hole screws, and I think pocket hole screws get a bad rap for two reasons. Number one, if they're used improperly and fail, and then number two, just from the fact that a mortise and tenon joint is stronger. That's obvious and also unfair. So long as pocket holes are used appropriately, they're plenty strong enough. It's like saying you need an F-250 Super Duty instead of a mid-sized four-door sedan because it's stronger, when in reality all you're doing is picking up groceries and taking the kids to soccer practice. Over a decade ago, I built this exact same table with slightly different dimensions for a laundromat. And if this joinery method can handle a commercial environment with constant humidity changes, it can definitely handle family use. For some added controversy, we started the base assembly without glue. Just screws here. Now, I know you're freaking out, but it's okay. It's okay. The joint will be braced later with glue. For now, I'm more concerned with not having any glue squeeze out to mess with between the rails and the legs. And again, it will be braced later. For the 1/4 inch offset, 1/4 inch drill bits are used to elevate the rail, and the bar of the clamp is used to reference the top of the rail to the top of the legs. Both of the shorter sides are assembled first, and then those are connected with the long rails. Now again, 1/4 inch drill bits are used to maintain a 1/4 inch offset from the rails to the legs. Finally, the interior rail is added to the center with a couple pocket hole screws as well. Now we can bring it over to some open floor space to work on the base right side up. Tabletop hold down clips are used to hold the top to the base. These are necessary as they hold the top to the base while still allowing the top to expand and contract. A slot of some kind is needed to hold the clip, and the biscuit joiner is my favorite tool for the task. I don't show adding them here because the owner of the table added them after finishing. More on that later. If you'd like an explanation of the hold down clips that I used, and I highly recommend, I'll have a link in the description to a previous video where I explain them in detail. Again, our goal was to build this in one day, so my main priority was to build the table, and the second priority was the camera. As I'm editing this, I also realized I did not show bracing the pocket hole joints, so I'll show that in SketchUp now. When making a pocket hole rail to leg table joint, I like to add an additional glue block right in the corner of the joint. This is just a scrap block glued and brad nailed into place. Once dry, you're left with two long grain to long grain glue joints with much greater surface area than the end grain to long grain pocket hole joint itself. I've never had one of these joints fail, and I've built a lot of these tables like this. Now the top is set in place bottom side up so that Bill could work on scraping the glue squeeze out while we sat around and did nothing. A straight edge and a circular saw is used to cut the table to its final length. All of the loose debris in the knots is picked out and then filled with Timbermate wood filler. I gave the option to put the top panel on my CNC and cut some bow tie inlays over the knots to get rid of them completely, but the decision was made to leave them for a more rustic look. The final step in the shop was to rough sand the top. The final sanding, finish, and connection of the base to the top was going to be done at home. So technically this was a one-day build to actually build it, but at least another day's work was necessary to finish it. One thing to note is the clamping time of the panels and legs. The legs were in clamps for about 4 hours and the top panel for about 6 hours. It was a 10-hour start to finish workday, but we took a long 2-ish hour lunch to give the panel more time in clamps. And here it is in its home. I have no idea what stain was used, what type of stain was used, what finish was applied, or if there even was a finish applied in these photos, but you can at least see it as it will be used in its home. I do have a free PDF of the dimensions for this table on my website if you're interested. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. That always helps. Go to my website, jacecustomcreations.com/newsletter to sign up for my email newsletter so you don't miss anything that I publish. That's it for this video. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you in the next video.